Switzerland, 1904. A young mentally unbalanced girl enters the psychiatric clinic, whom her father brought here by force. Sabina Spielrein suffers from a mental disorder and poorly controls her body. Plus obsessive voices in her head often dictate crazy ideas. The attending psychiatrist of Sabina is Carl Jung, one of the founders of psychoanalysis and a promising follower of Sigmund Freud, with whom Jung is familiar with correspondence. Carl wants to find out what exactly Sabina is disturbed by, so instead of generally accepted therapy, the doctor will simply communicate with the girl for a couple of hours a day. At the first meeting, Carl learns that Sabina since childhood was subjected to beatings from her father. Sabina is a Russian Jewish and daughter of a wealthy businessman, and her level of education in the field of medicine and the desire to become a psychiatrist convinces Carl to apply a new method, healing with a conversation. Freud described this method in his works, but only in theory, because the professor did not find a suitable patient. Walking around the park, Carl tells Sabina that her desire to become a psychiatrist is quite normal, and moreover it can be implemented. During the conversation, Carl is always calm and not demanding, so he communicates with the girl on an equal footing. And Sabina more and more trusts him and more diligently resists the new panic attacks. Once Carl is forced to leave the clinic for several days, and Sabina does not like his absence, so she again loses her temper and ceases to control her body and desires. Upon the return, Carl learns about the recent attacks of Sabina. But instead of psychoanalysis, Carl offers to become his assistant and treat the rest of the patients together. The director of the clinic approves this idea, because there are not enough staff, and a salary-less worker is always good. Sabina is immersed in the work as an assistant and even complements one diagnosis of Jung. The mental condition of Sabina improves and stabilizes, because now she feels useful and necessary. Jung is married to a very rich woman named Emma. She gave birth to 3 daughters and is very worried that Carl wanted a boy. However, he constantly convinces her that all is perfect and he is happy to have such a family. Carl learns that in childhood, Sabina's father beat her and her brothers, and once, again experiencing pain and humiliation, she was excited. Having matured, Sabina touched herself when she saw the scenes of violence and enjoyed it. Even at school, to censure from the teacher, Sabina again started this strange mechanism, and she felt pleasure. 2 years later, Carl and Emma come to Austria to first see Professor Freud. Colleagues share experience and Freud asks Carl about Sabina. Carl considers her emotionally open, flexible and idealistic, which surprises Freud, because patients with a similar history of the disease in his practice were always hopeless. Carl believes that Freud's analysis methods are too categorical as well. Carl advises Freud not to look for sexual subtext in every disease. In the evening, Carl talks about his recent dream, in which the horse pulls a log and slows down because of this. Freud believes that the horse is Carl himself, and he is afraid that soon the family will become an obstacle to his professional ambitions. Freud says that Carl subconsciously suppresses his sexual desire, so do not get more children, who can prevent him from professional growth. Carl returns to the clinic and speaks with Sabina, who has transformed in 2 years of medical practice and ceased to be like crazy. Carl questions Freud's methods, because his obsession only with a sexual component in psychoanalysis seems to Carl a way to a dead end. After all, it cannot be that the universe hang on one nail, says Jung. Later, Freud asks Carl to provide qualified assistance to Dr. Otto Gross, a talented psychiatrist and unpredictable person, whom his own father sent to the hospital. The old man wanted to quickly have grandchildren, and Otto took up this order too responsibly, so he simultaneously replenished the family with children from his wife and mistress. Otto is a neurotic person obsessed with sexual satisfaction, and he does not consider monogamy useful. Otto tells Carl his most important discovery: limiting the desires is very dangerous for the psyche. Otto, albeit a former, is also a psychiatrist, therefore shares with Carl his method of treatment, which differs from the popular methods of Freud. Otto helps patients find freedom, offering what they lack, even if it is sex or suicide, and he leaves the choice of the patient, because everyone himself is the master of his life. Otto believes that sex is one of the really pleasant things that is given to humanity, but is surrounded by excessive hysteria and is massively suppressed. The next day, Sabina tells Carl that she suffers from the lack of sexual experience, and in her opinion, This is what prevents her complete recovery. Sabina believes if her mental disorder roots in children's excitement during the scenes of violence, then the experience of proximity will help her heal and know herself. Carl says that he does not consider this method logical, but suddenly Sabina kisses him, then she tells her address to embarrassed Carl, in case if he wants to help Sabina get this experience. Later, Carl tells Otto about this event, which is confused a colleague. Otto advises Carl to succumb to temptation, because why refuse himself such a simple pleasure? Carl does not see it to be simple, so the convincing Otto emphasizes that people themselves complicate everything. But not clear only for what. Later Otto leaves the clinic forever, leaving a letter to Carl with gratitude and request. Otto wants him to be recognized as dead, so his father does not look for him. Also Carl reads the last advice from the fugitive, not to pass by the well if it is possible to get water from it. Having lost his last strength to resist the temptation, Carl goes home to Sabina in the evening to finally have sex with her. Later, the Jung family buys a large spacious house, and Emma gives Carl a walking yacht. He is increasingly meeting with Sabina at her house, leaving this part of his life a secret from everyone. Once Carl becomes unbearably living in lies and he offers Sabina to stop these dates, but she begs him not to do this. In addition, Carl is not able to resist the temptation, so he continues to visit Sabina and retire with her on a yacht. Later, Carl comes to Freud and reports on the escaped Otto and his theory that it is not worth suppressing the desires. Freud states that now Carl is the last of his students. Freud does not approve that Carl is not fixated on sexuality and is more interested in research by psychoanalysis in areas close to mysticism, such as telepathy and parapsychology. Freud also tells Carl that he receives anonymous letters from an unfamiliar Jung's patient, where she admits that Carl is cheating on his own wife with her. Freud says that he does not believe this, but Carl begins to seriously fear the exposure, because then he will lose his family and professional reputation. Carl does not want to hear the excuses of Sabina and breaks the relationship with her. Later, the angry Sabina writes Freud about her desire to discuss the events that had happened with her and Carl. Freud wants to act as an intermediary and a third party in this conflict, so he sends Sabina a request to forget about her feelings and not look for meetings with Carl. Reading this letter, Sabina cries from hopelessness and unrequited love. Carl quits from the clinic so that his career and personal life do not grow over with new rumors. Sabina learns about this and comes to his office. She knows that Carl denied everything, and she promises not to blackmail the doctor on one condition. He must admit to Freud that their relationship was true, because then Sabina can become a patient of the professor. Carl has long been disappointed with the stubborn pragmatism of Freud and agrees to fulfill the request of Sabina, since it is so important to her. Later, Carl, along with Freud, pass through the Atlantic to speak in America with a report in the field of psychoanalysis. In the evening on the deck, Carl tells the professor another interesting dream, and Freud willingly analyzes the subconscious of his colleague. Freud himself does not want to share his dreams, because in his opinion, this will drop his authority. Carl is again disappointed in Freud, because the fear of losing his greatness making the professor a conservative pragmatist. How can he psychoanalysis of people every day without having previously figured out what is happening in his own head? A few years later, Carl and Sabina meet again, not as a doctor and patient, but as colleagues. Sabina brought Carl a dissertation on psychoanalysis so that he would read and offer editing. She considers their meetings dangerous and Carl agrees, but he assures the girl that they have enough willpower not to succumb to temptation. Later, they discuss her dissertation, where Sabina believes that true sexuality requires the destruction of the own ego, and Carl delights this thought, because it contradicts Freud's teachings. Carl is not able to resist the passion, so the discussion of the dissertation ends with their intimacy. After, Sabina admits that she will forever leave Switzerland as soon as she receives a diploma. Carl says that he cannot overcome cowardice and abandon his family, but it is difficult for him to live without Sabina, so he asks her not to leave the clinic. 2 years later, Freud offers Sabina to examine several of her patients, and she agrees. Later, at a conference in Germany, Carl tells Freud that he will work on creating his own name in the field of psychoanalysis. Carl is annoying Freud's manner to communicate arrogantly even with his friends, as if they were his patients. According to Carl, Freud's such behavior forces others to or blindly obey the idol or go against. Freud's student simply has no space for his own opinion, which means a student's contribution to the development of psychoanalysis will never be significant. Carl chooses to renounce the great teacher, and at that moment Freud loses consciousness. Later, Carl and Freud exchange several more letters, but this does not lead to a compromise. Despite the richest experience in psychology, the two best specialists of their time finally break the relations, unable to withstand mutual criticism. After 3 years, a pregnant Sabina visits the house of the Jungs. Emma is concerned about the Carl's condition, because after a quarrel with Freud, her husband became closed, stopped taking patients and almost do not sleep. Even now, he is not at the table, but sits nearby, staring at the serene course of the river. Emma asks Sabina to talk with Carl, because now she is not only a person close to him, but also an experienced psychologist. Carl learns that Sabina married a doctor and is going to leave for Russia. Carl reproaches Sabina that she took the side of Freud in their last dispute. Sabina recalls that it was Freud's method that healed her, but Carl does not agree, because further events brought even more problems, the solution of which the great teacher has not yet presented to the world. Carl wants to treat people and not smugly quote generally accepted norms, because the story of each patient is unique. In other words, Carl wants not only to listen to the patient, but also to give him specific individual practical advice. Carl believes that only the suffering doctor is able to heal, and his acquaintance with Sabina helped him to realize this. He is sure that love for Sabina was the most important thing in his life, and helped to understand himself. And this child, under her heart, should be from Carl, and Sabina agrees with this, barely restraining tears. Saying goodbye, Sabina leaves in a carriage and cries, and Carl continues to look into the river with an empty gaze. Otto Gross died of hunger in Berlin in 1919. Sigmund Freud was expelled from Vienna by the Nazis and died of cancer in London in 1939. Sabine Spielrein returned to her native Rostov-on-Don, and in 1941 she and her 2 daughters were shot by the Nazis in the local synagogue. During the First World War, Carl Gustav Jung experienced a severe nervous breakdown, recovering after which he became a leading world psychologist. He survived his wife Emma and mistress Tony Wolfe and quietly died in 1961.